Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I want to talk a little bit about a revelation that I had actually last night. I was talking to a buddy about some pocket knives, as I want to do, and it just kind of hit me as clear as day. We have entered the self-publishing era of the knife world, and I want to talk a little bit about what that means, why it's good, bad, and ugly, and, why the heck this is worth even talking about. So, for those of you unfamiliar, it used to be the case that if you wanted to publish a book, you needed to go to a publishing company, right? You needed to find a group of people whose main shtick, so to speak, is to publish books. And what they would do is they would look at your manuscript, and most of the time they'd say, hey, screw you, go away. We don't want to publish what you got there. Sometimes they'd say, yeah, that looks good, and they'd hook you up with an editor, right? The editor would go through, they'd say, oh, okay, you should change this, you got some typos here. This chapter could really go a lot quicker. And then eventually, once everybody was happy, you would go forward, and they would print your book and whatnot, and you could sell the book, and they would provide, that was a whole affair, right? And these companies actually served, in some ways, a valuable purpose, right? They improved the quality of books, because not any random jackass who wrote a couple hundred pages can, write the book with them, right? It has to be of a certain quality, perhaps. There's some editing that goes on. And also just the logistical support of, I personally could not print the book right now. I could print a bunch of sheets of paper, but it'd make for a really crappy book experience. So they brought a lot to the table at a certain point. But the thing is, though, the world has kind of changed out from under that. With the ability, and this was always a thing, but I think it's become much more common these days, the availability of what's called a vanity press, right? Or a group of, a company basically that says, you know what, we're going to print your book. If you come to us with a book and with a certain amount of money to pay us to print your book, we will print your book. And we'll do it under our imprint, or we'll do it, but basically these are companies who don't actually have any particular standard. They don't have any skin in the game. They're making their money off of the author who wants to print the book. Like, I really don't care what you're publishing here. I'm sure there were probably limits, but whatever it is, we'll take whatever you hand to us, and we will put put it together and make a book for you, and we'll even list it with the companies that we work with, right? And so these vanity presses, for actually a long time, weren't looked upon super well, right? I self-published the book, and usually that meant lower quality, etc. Thing is, I'm telling you all of this because I realize that we have entered the vanity press era of knife making, and that's good and that's bad at the same time. I think historically, and given certainly that the analogies aren't exact, but historically, if you were a designer, for instance, and you wanted to get something made, what you would generally do is you would go to one of the bigger companies, right? You would approach a Spyderco, a Benchmade, a ZT, one of those kinds of things, and try and do a design collaboration. And lots of people have, right? The books of some of the major companies, in fact, some of their best models all around are design collaborations with other people, right? Benchmade has the 940, which I should actually have on screen because why not, right? There's a collaboration with Osborne, the designs, right? I believe Warren Osborne. Anyways, I digress. These are collaborations, right? And sometimes the designers were in-house, like Sal Blesser with Spyderco, and sometimes work with other folks, like Marcin Swish, right? The guy who does this Swish Bowie, right? So there were a lot of really good designs that came through there. But as a part of that process, generally speaking, a number of decisions would be made by the company that was making them. Like, is this a good design? Is this something we want to put our name on? Maybe some edits would happen, not only in terms of, internal mechanism and things like that, but also in terms of potentially safety. Like, oh, this part isn't going to go well, we need to do this differently. Or maybe they might improve the action. Look, the world is full of knives that were actually better as production knives than they were as customs, because the production company, had the resources and the tooling to dial in all those internal parts, right? And so as a result, though, the end product was very much, a product of the designer, but it was also very much a product of the company that made it. The other big thing, and the other big difference is when something like that happens, and actually this still exists to a very real extent, right? But what actually happens is that the company is sort of putting their name on it. It is, for instance, the Spyderco, here, let's just go on ahead and grab one. Spyderco Swish Bowie, right? This is a Spyderco knife. It happens to be a collaboration with Marcin Swish, but at the same time, it is 100% a Spyderco, and, they take responsibility for it, and they probably take a hefty cut of the profit from doing it, right? That's reasonable. But the knife ends up different. It ends up feeling, well, it's made by them, right? So the thing is, though, it's not working that way as often anymore. We have had a spate of companies come onto the scene that are basically factories, but more importantly, they're factories that don't just work with big companies. They're factories that work with smaller people. So we got places like, for instance, We Knives is a really nice example of that. And We Knives is, they made this guy. This is the booze, just on the table here. This is the Serge Panchenko slip joint Brian Nadeau, shot by Design Void. Knife Nuts Podcast Edition. This is the Booze Blade Smoke. This is the Red Horse Hellraiser. This is the Pena Front Flipper Zulu. And this is the Civivi McKenna in the Brass Scale Edition. All of these are examples of knives that are coming from the designer, but through an independent factory sort of thing. So we've got major companies that do this, right? Sometimes the companies are well known, like We Knives, which produced both of these guys. Some of the companies are not necessarily known to consumers, but they are a company like the Red Horse had this made overseas by a factory, although I don't know that the factory name is actually out there in public. Some are very well known, like Rayot here, did not design either of these knives, but produced both of these guys, the Pena and the Void. And then sometimes the factory is, again, unclear, but it is an overseas company. And so now it's the case that as a designer, you can approach a factory, and if you can finance the run, they will make your knife. And my understanding is that there's not a lot of editing that goes on in the process, right? That basically, and looking at some of the stuff that comes out in the market, it's pretty clear that there's not a lot of editing going on. By the way, I'm not saying anything negative about these particular knives. They're just on the table because they represent this trend. Increasingly, it is possible for any random jackass to create a knife brand, as long as they have money and they have a design of some variety or another, ideally a gathering cat, you can get it made. By and large. You might have to wait a little bit. You might have to pay a little bit more money, and some of the companies are completely booked up, so to speak. But it is easier than ever to get something made. So much like in the era of book publishing, where it's now the case that I can just publish something online. If I've got a PDF, I can put it up on Amazon, and then they will, if somebody actually orders a copy of it, they'll print a copy of it and send it their way, right? That's now a thing that you can do more or less on your own, without going through a Spyderco, without going through a Benchmade, without going through CRKT or any of the other big production companies. And as a result, this is good and this is bad. We'll focus on the bad part first, just because the biggest issue with this is that there is no editor anymore. There is no bar to clear, basically. There have been a number of really excellent knives that come out this way, and I consider all of these to be among them, by the way. All of these are, a part of my collection, for long term or short. But nonetheless, actually, this guy's going to go for a domestic violence charity thing at some point in time here soon. But nonetheless, all of these guys are pretty excellent examples of when this goes really well, but sometimes it goes very badly, right? I've had makers send prototypes, or frankly, I've just seen on the market pieces that really I don't think ever should have left the cutting room floor, so to speak. Nobody stopped and said, I'm not sure that this is going to sell well. Or nobody stopped and said, this part here is really unsafe. When the blade is closed, it's actually sticking out further than the scales. Nobody said that. Dude, stop, don't do that, right? And nobody stopped and said, is this going to sell in the market that's already oversaturated? And increasingly, I'm seeing this, and I've asked this question before, like, why? Every new knife, every new piece of any product should have a why to it. It should have a reason to exist. And for a lot of people, the reason for this thing, the reason that their new product is different is because, well, they made it and they didn't make the other ones. And that's fine. I totally get that. But at the same time, that's something that matters to them, but not to the rest. So the lack of an editor can be a major problem, both in allowing things through that really shouldn't have gotten through from a perspective of potentially safety, but even just like design flaws. Like, wait a second. When you do it this way, then the clip is very vulnerable to X, Y, and Z. That's not great. And so the lack of editor is problematic. The other thing, well, actually a couple of other things. It also dilutes a brand very strongly, right? Most of these are own-branded sorts of affairs, right? Each one of these guys is going under the maker's brand, except this guy. This is Civivi Knives. And Civivi makes a lot of knives. They make a lot of really good knives, and they make a lot of kind of boring knives. They make a lot of knives that aren't very interesting. And very often when companies do this sort of more professionally, right, when companies are open to any design, they release everything and let the market sort it out. And as a result, for the company itself, it ends up being the case that I can't say that, does Civivi make good knives? They can make very good knives, but they also make some knives that are really not that interesting, right? Without that editing, it can feel like the brand just doesn't have a lot of consistency. If 90% of the stuff they make is uninteresting, boring, or bad, and they make 10% gems, mostly they make bad knives. And so this can be problematic for the brand, right? This can be problematic for the maker releasing with that brand. Like, I don't necessarily know whether this kind of thing, if a company releases a bunch of crap and somebody releases a new knife with them, my first question isn't like, oh, that must be good. It's like, oh, I wonder if that's one of the crap ones or one of the good ones, right? So that can be, pretty problematic. But the other big thing that this has led to is just a complete and total overload of new stuff on the market, right? Oh, my God. Every freaking morning I wake up and there were 4 more people flogging their new knives on the world, right? It is absolutely a thing. And some of this is from existing companies and some of this is from random people who have finally gotten their run of knives made. Thing is, all of these people are very passionate, right? They have a dream. In some cases, their dream is to get into knife making. And in some cases, it's amazing. It works out really well. And if they've got great design sense, that's how dreams begin. But at the same time, it results in a market that is incredibly competitive and oversaturated, right? Very often I get new makers contacting me and saying, Nick, I've come up with these things. I'm having these made by this factory. I'd love you to check out the prototypes. And look, I'm always happy to do that. I do consulting. Look, I'm happy to look at your stuff. But the most common comment I end up making to people is, this is a really nice piece. It's made very well. And, you've done a decent enough job with the design here. But there's nothing that makes this stand out when 50 other people have done something very similar to this in the last, 24 hours, right? In a world where there are so many frame locks, in a world where there are so many liner locks, in a world where there are so many nice knives being created every day, it takes a lot to stand out. And so that lack of editing and that the ability of anybody to become a brand has meant not only that there is more and more and more coming out every day, but that it's harder and harder to stand out. You have to have a design that is really unique or really exceptional. You have to have direction of the factory that is really exceptional or a very distinctive personal style, maybe in this case too. And frankly, Isham's case, Elijah Isham being the designer of the Civivi McKenna here. But anyways, as a result though, everybody is releasing a brand new piece and it takes a lot to get noticed. And I feel very badly because very often I see these projects kind of die on the vine. Right? I see Kickstarters that start up and they don't start, that don't even start, so to speak. They're Kickstoppers, I suppose. I see people who, order a bunch of stuff and then have trouble moving it because, well, there are 50 things just like it available more readily from other distributors, or, just the design isn't quite compelling enough to pry the $300 out of the wallet, right? So you end up with this really oversaturated world in which I, as a knife consumer, go on Instagram and it's like, wow, 50 new releases today. Did I care about any of them? Actually, no, not really. And where conventional signals of goodness, like, oh, this actually made it to production. That used to mean this is probably at least a little bit good, at least in the moderate to high range, but now it just means somebody had enough money to create it. Right? And so as a result, it ends up being a little frustrating. Like the net quality of available higher-end pocket knife has gone substantially down with the introduction of this. Now, that said, that sounds very doomy and gloomy, but in reality, this could be a very good thing. And I think what we're feeling right now is a period of adjustment. So the thing is, the downside to having the publishing companies, and I'm going to be getting this in the comments already from people who don't know I'm coming here, the downside to all that, I'm not idealizing that at all. In fact, I'm a big fan of democratizing, well, just generally speaking, all of these kinds of things. I want people to be able to do what they want to do on their own. Giving people access to that is great. But the downside of that is if a publisher gets a book and it's a little controversial, maybe it's a little bit, it's got themes that are a little bit more adult, it's got themes that are a little bit more blasphemous. I don't freaking know. There are lots of things you can do to make an editor or an advertiser uncomfortable, and as a result, they're not going to publish your book, and it could be an amazing piece, right? But maybe they just didn't give you the time of day. And the other thing to remember is that editors aren't perfect by a mile, right? Editors, reviewers, all those folks, especially reviewers. Anyways, there is a lot of mistake made there, right? Like, oh, and you hear every time, oh, I got rejected 24 times before I wrote this New York Times bestseller. This is definitely a thing. And so there's a lot of gatekeeping involved. And one thing that this allows people to do is that people with a dream and a vision and really cool products can bypass that system. They don't have to sell it to a company to do this. They can do this entirely on their own. And as a result, things end up on the market that might not have ended up on the market otherwise. And that's a beautiful thing, right? And it gives people an opportunity to control their publication in a way, like, Brian Nadeau. I think Shop by Design is a company or a person, I suppose, a dude, who does a really good job leveraging that control, right? The way that he basically runs these factories, it tells them to do things, results in something that is really remarkable, right? But it's probably not a level of control he might have working with another major maker, right? And so as a result, that can be a beautiful thing. Having that autonomy of just like, what, screw you, I'm going to do this on my own with a factory, can result in amazing things. And so ultimately, we end up in this really awkward situation where there are more pieces available than ever. And in the fact that it's been made, the fact that it's made at a price point, the fact that there are 1,000 of them available means absolutely nothing with regards to the quality of that product anymore. That's been the case for books for a while now, right? You go on Amazon and you search for any given term, and there were 50 people who've self-published something about it, and chances are, but there are gems in the rough, right? For every, 10 people that are able to publish that really shouldn't, or every, 5 people who are able to make a knife that may not have been necessary for the market, to put it kindly, there is going to be somebody who wasn't going to get a shot before and create something absolutely astounding. And so this changes the game, fundamentally. This absolutely changes the game. And as a result, we end up in a world where it is easier and it is harder to find the gems, right? Because new stuff is coming out that wouldn't have a chance. And so we are dealing with the same issue. I think that the democratization of internet, of publishing, of all of these things, it's analogous, right? Now we have a democratization of a sorts of production. You are able to get anything made. That means a lot more things are getting made. The quality might not be up there, but at the same time, there are gems in the rough. So I don't know. This just struck me as a really nice analogy, and it kind of encapsulates a lot of what I've been feeling lately. Just like looking at the market and surveying it and being like, wow, there's a lot of crap out there. There are gems. Oh my God, are there gems? And there's stuff that's unique that we've never seen before. But it's just drowning in this miasma of crap that didn't need to be made. And so, I don't know, I feel a little bit better about it, right? We've seen the joy of allowing free exchange of information online. We've seen the joy of allowing people to publish things that might have been turned down by major publishers, but then suddenly became really popular, right? I'm trying to think of a good book example offhand, but look, we've seen that joy. And so maybe what we're seeing here is the downside of like, oh, wow, the market just changed, but then hopefully there will be an adjustment where it's like, oh, hey, the market changed. This is better. And so I don't know. That's just my thinking. A bit of a rant, but I hope it's been interesting to you at the very least. And, let me know what your favorite self-published sort of pocket knife out there is right now. I'm very curious about that. And let me know in the comments there, of course. And have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.